the New Testament is done with by the end of the first century, early maybe into the second century, depending on how you date Revelation, but that it's early, that it's very early. And there are those people who are, they're going to argue against this on a couple of different fronts. I'll deal with the easier one first, that the Bible is not reliable because it's been translated so many times. You can't trust what we have because it's been translated so many times. So maybe what he is saying is true about something out there somewhere, but it's not true about what we have today because it's been translated so many times. Have you heard this? Come on, I need hands. You've heard this. Okay, great. I've heard this. People have told me, people at reputable schools have told me about professors who've made this claim. The people who make these claims, this particular claim, are either ignorant or evil or both. And I'm not just being mean. Let me explain to you why. Because the Bible's been translated so many times, and they'll say it's like a game of telephone. All right? The game has different names in different parts of the world, okay? But the game, you whisper into the ear of this person, and then he whispers into his ear, he whispers into his ear, so on and so forth. And then we come all the way down here, and you have to tell me what this guy whispered into your ear. By the time it gets to you, it sounds nothing like what I whispered into the ear of the first person, right? And so this is the argument that they make about the Bible being translated so many times and about us not being able to trust the Bible because of how many times it was translated. This bothers me a great deal. It bothers me a great deal that there are people who claim to be intelligent who continue to make this argument, and it bothers me that there are Christians who don't laugh at them. Because here's the problem. If I am the Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic manuscripts, I don't just whisper into his ear and then everybody else have to hear what I told him. See, I'm reading from the English Standard Version. This translation was done in the early 2000s. They didn't just go back to the next oldest translation and translate from that. They went to the Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic manuscripts themselves, which means the game actually goes like this. I speak to him, and then I speak to him, and then I speak to him, and then I speak to him, and I speak to him, 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 and then I speak to him, so that when he says what he heard, it's the same thing that guy heard because he got it from the same source. That's why people who make this argument are either ignorant or they're evil or both. How can any intelligent human being argue against the validity of the Bible because of the number of times it's been translated? Listen, if you would bother to go learn how to read Hebrew or Greek or Aramaic, you could go to the source yourself. These translations can be tested. There's software that you can use to test these translations against the documents that they're translating. There's no hiding here. In fact, we are more capable today than we've ever been at translating the Bible. Yeah, well, the documents that we have are just late documents, and we don't know what there were in those earlier documents. Okay. All right. Let's look at that for a moment, shall we? When we're talking about the manuscripts themselves, because there are some issues that we have to talk about there. When it comes to the Bible, it's true, we don't have originals because of the material that these originals were written on. We don't have originals. But let's limit ourselves tonight just to the New Testament, shall we? Just when we're talking about the New Testament, we don't have any originals. But we do have documents that date back as early as AD 120, AD 100 to AD 120. That's within a couple of decades of the completion of the New Testament. We can go back and put our hands on documents that were dated within a couple of decades of the completion of the New Testament. How many manuscripts do we have? The New Testament, we have over 6,000 manuscripts or portions of manuscripts of the New Testament. Over 6,000. Over 6,000 manuscripts or portions of manuscripts. And we can go back to within a couple of decades of the last writings. If that doesn't sound impressive to you, it's because you don't deal with ancient writings. For example, if we're talking about Aristotle's Poetics, we have less than a dozen manuscripts of Aristotle's Poetics, and the earliest one that we can go back to is over 1,000 years after the writing. Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, again, less than a dozen, and it's over 1,000 years between the last writing and the first manuscript we can put our hands on. The best example that we have in terms of number of documents is Homer's Iliad. Homer's Iliad, we have a few hundred manuscripts, but the earliest one we can put our hands on was written 2,100 years after the original. And people have the audacity to question the New Testament. That's ridiculous. If it was a fight, they'd stop it. They wouldn't even let it start. If the Bible is not considered reliable or trustworthy in an institution like this, then there is no ancient document that should ever be considered trustworthy at an institution like this, because none comes close to the Bible. Yeah, well, but then we know that there's the whole overzealous monk theory, right? And that it's these monks and it's this Constantine guy. Again, that's more Dan Brown than it is. Okay, that's Da Vinci Code. That's the movies. That's not actual history. But even if we were to go there, okay, there's a few problems. Number one, there's a manuscript problem, and there's 6,000 Greek manuscripts or portions of manuscripts. So if we have these, monks during the time of Constantine who are going to go back and who are going to change the New Testament, they would have to find 6,000 Greek manuscripts and portions of manuscripts, change them all the exact same way. Don't show your ink work, don't get caught, never tell anybody what you did. There's a second layer of problem. Jesus said, go and make disciples of pantata ethne, every people group, every ethnic group, right? Problem with people groups is they speak different languages. So within the first couple of centuries, the New Testament is translated into Syriac, Coptic, and Latin. So now, your overzealous monks during the time of Constantine have to go find 6,000 manuscripts, change them all the exact same way, don't show your ink work, don't get caught, don't tell anybody what you did. Then learn how to lie in Syriac, Coptic, and Latin, as well as you lie in Greek, because if you don't, there's going to be a problem, because now the Greek manuscripts won't match the translations into these other languages. So you got to change those, right? And then again, don't show your ink work, don't get caught, don't tell anybody. There's a third layer of problem. The early church fathers. The early church fathers had this horrible habit of quoting and writing commentaries on the New Testament. So much so that if all we had were the writings of the early church fathers, we would be able to reproduce the New Testament all but 11 verses. So now, our overzealous monks have to find 6,000 Greek manuscripts, lie, don't show your ink work, don't get caught, don't tell anybody what you did. Learn how to lie in Syriac, Coptic, and Latin as well as you lie in Greek. Go get all those things from around the world. Make sure your lies match, get them back. Don't tell anybody what you did. Find all of the writings of the early church fathers and make sure that their commentaries now match all the lies that you told in Syriac, Coptic, Latin, and Greek. That's fantasy. That's fantasy, okay? That's absolute fantasy.